Hey, let me tell you, there's nothing more difficult than being 25 and having to follow that dude up because he can play guitar. That's really awful. We're on a time limit on my preaching. We're going to go over. All right. Did we get that off our chests? Ruth chapter 2. You heathens. Time to talk about the Lord. Hey, we're going to be in Ruth chapter 2 tonight. We're in Ruth 1 last week, and what I want to talk about is simply this, kind of going off of last week, right? Last week we talked about being able to sacrifice of ourselves, that the church should be able to sacrifice of ourselves for the sake of one another. That we should be able to love people, be so committed to people so much differently than the world is, that we would be able to put everything of ourselves to the side and not be concerned about it. And the natural assumption walking away from that is, how in the world do you do that? How can someone just sacrifice of themselves and not have any concern or care about their own self and their own happiness and their own success for the sake of other people? Just 100% all out. How can anyone in the world do that? And what I would submit to you is simply this. Hey, there are some relationships that take trust, right? Like some relationships, they just take trust. And so we're going to put that to the test. Okay, where's Carson Kane at? This is what you get for being related to me. I need you for a couple seconds. I need Carson and I need Valerie to come up here. Everybody heard of a trust fall? Are we good on that? Yes, that's what I wanted. I was like, that's it. So when I was in high school, right, was right about the time that surprise trust falls. We discovered these things that we were like, yes. And clearly there's not surprise trust. You're up here. What's the surprise? You're really going to mess it up? Oh, I didn't know she was going to fall. And so, we don't even have to worry about that. But catch her. Oh my gosh. Okay, Siri, come here, right there. Please. I'm not falling or catching. I'm not falling or catching. We're about to find out how thick this friendship is. Okay? I hope you guys break up after tonight. Anyway, so friend break up, you weirdos. Okay, so what I want to look at is trust falls. And so we're just very simply, I wasn't even going to pick you to fall. I was going to do that to her, but if you want to line up, that's cool. Look at it. She's already trusting you. Lower. This is in the middle school hour, right here.
No.
Yeah, what?
I'm going to die.
You're going to be okay. You're just right here, right there. Okay, scoot a little bit further forward. Oh my gosh. Okay, simply, I swear, if you take a step, we will trust fall until you actually fall. I promise you. I will call your father. Okay. Just don't even worry about it. Just fall. Okay, that's good enough. See, she had your life in her hands. You're all great friends. Go sit down. I'm done with you. So I love a good trust fall. Clearly, I did not play football in high school. That was not in the cards. The Lord did not create me to be able to take a hit from another 200-pound man. I would have broken instantly or just turned to dust. But I had a good friend that played football. He was on the offensive line, and he was a big dude. And he loved trust falls, okay, and not the catching. He loved the falling. But the problem is, he loved the falling on the skinny kid, which, we call that bullying now. It's just rude. And so, and again, not like we see it coming, but he would just be walking through and just be like, hey man, poof, and I'd be like, you're going to die. This is it. It was great knowing you. It was a great friendship. There's no way I'm catching you. But he would do that. And as I was thinking through trust falls, right, and for him, he's a big dude, he'll bounce right back up, probably, I don't know. And it takes a great amount of trust, right? The instant that I bring two decently average friends, I've heard them talk about each other behind their backs. But I'm kidding. You love each other. It's great. But the moment that we take two fairly decent friends and we're like, hey, trust fall. They're like, no, I'm not even. Something as simple. They're falling. Your hands are perfectly placed by the Lord to catch. Everything is totally fine. Nothing's going to happen. It's not like I'm going to sit here and just be like, oh no, she's not going to catch her. And 911. Someone call the hospital. That's not going to happen. But the moment that we do that, we kind of panic. And the middle school hour was great too, because when I let the little sixth grader know that he was going to be the one to fall, he was like, please, no. Like he met Jesus for the first time right there. Like he was like, this is it. I'm coming home. And so we look at that, and relationships take trust, right? And every relationship has a different amount of trust, right? There are people that we can trust with anything, and there are some people that like we wouldn't even tell our favorite color to, right? There are all these different amounts of trust, but every relationship really has that as part of it. And what I want to submit to you today is the ability or lack of ability to serve and love other people, to sacrifice of yourself, simply comes at base level of a lack of trust in God. 100%, when we take it all back and we say, I can't really go do this thing. I can't really sacrifice of myself for this person. I can't go love this other person. I can't sacrifice these things, these wants, these desires I have for this friendship, this relationship, or whatever it is. It always comes back to a lack of trust in God. And so as we talked about last week, and we said, hey, man, we want to sacrifice for one another. We want to love one another. We want the church and this youth ministry to be, like, you should be the best group of friends. Like, everyone should want to be friends with people in the church. Because we take care of each other, because we watch out for each other, because we look out for one another, better than any group of people around. But now the reality is that we don't do that. Right, we talked about last week, because the reality is that we're actually not very good about that. As a matter of fact, the church is often full of what the New Testament likes to call vipers. That we are often very tense and angry and rude to one another. There's often a lot of tension around the church. The outside view of the church is like usually not good. And so we wonder, okay, well, how does what the church is and the outside view of it not lining up with what it should be? And it comes back to it's people having a lack of trust in God at their base core level within their relationships. So when we looked at Ruth chapter 1 last week, we saw Ruth and Naomi, the mother-in-law of Ruth. Ruth's husband has died, Naomi's husband has died. And at this point in history, like there is no future for widows. Like they need husbands to take care of them, to establish a family line, for there to be food, for there to be work, right? Like women weren't just like going out and getting jobs. Like that did not exist at this point in time. We should be so blessed. And so in that, Naomi says, look, Ruth, you got to go. You got to go back to your land. You got to get married so you can reestablish your lineage, so you can be taken care of, so you can have wealth, so you can have like basics of food and shelter, because I can't give you any of that because I am not married, nor am I young enough to have another son to give you somebody else to marry. And by the time that he's old enough to marry, you're going to be like 18 years older than him, and like that's not in at this point in time, okay? And so we look at that and we say, there's nothing that I can do for you, Ruth. And Ruth says, that's okay. I will sacrifice everything, my land, my people, my family, because you are my family now, and I will love you, and your God will be my God, and your people will be my people. And we go, man, that takes a lot of courage from Ruth. How does she do that? Because our common instinct is to have this thought, if you're taking notes or anything like that, that what about me? Like, who is going to take care of me? Anytime you enter in a relationship, you kind of forfeit that right of taking care of yourself and being hopeful that someone else would do the same for you that you would do for them. Okay, so a lot of fights that happen in friendships and relationships and into marriage and things like that goes a lot like this. I did the dishes 5 times last week. When are you going to do the dishes? Never in our house. We don't fight about silly things like dishes because we're holy people. Just kidding. We fight about dishes like every hour. But we look at those things, and it comes from, I am taking care of you. Like, when are you going to take care of me? Like, I married you because the hope was that you were going to be like a half-decent husband, you moron. I'm just kidding. Haley would never call me a moron or slap me. Maybe. And so, that's that tension, right? And my favorite thing to do is to look, oh man, you guys are like social media geniuses. I'm not a big reality TV guy, but if I was, it would just be like high schoolers on social media. It would be so great because the thing that you hate the most are like bad friends, fake friends. You hate fake friends, so you subtweet about them until your fingers bleed. And so you're like sitting there and you're like, man, I just wish that somebody would take care of me and do for me what I would do for them. And everyone on Twitter is like, you know who she's talking about. And it's just this weird friction because you hate fake friends. You hate people that don't have your back, that don't take care of you, that aren't committed to you, that aren't faithful in that friendship, that don't love you the way that you think you love them, but probably don't because you're probably just as bad a friend as them. And you hate it. And so you're like constantly cutting ties. I've never talked with a teenager that is like 100%. I never witnessed drama. There's never drama around me. And if I do, it's probably because that person is just like, friend, dead. Another friend, cut him off. I don't want drama in my life. And I'm like, I've never met that. And it always comes from you have an expectancy of how that friend should be to you. And you have a very hard time trusting those people to be faithful to you. And so you would never sacrifice of yourself for them. And what it really comes is a root that you have a very hard time thinking that God would be faithful to you, that he would take care of you, that you would see the way that you love people, the way that you sacrifice of yourself for other people, and that you would honor that. And so you wonder, man, what about me? Who will look after me? And we see this in Ruth chapter 2. And it's a little bit of a long passage. We're not going to read through the whole chapter, but I think it's important to kind of see the whole narrative of this. Chapter 2, verse 1. It says, now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side from the clan of Elimelech, a man of standing whose name was Boaz. And Ruth, the Moabitess, said to Naomi, let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor. Naomi said to her, go ahead, my daughter. So she went out and began to glean in the fields behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she found herself working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. The Lord be with you. The Lord bless you, they called back. Boaz asked the foreman of his harvesters, whose young woman is that? So Boaz comes into work, and he sees everybody harvesting the fields, and then he sees Ruth, and he goes, who is that? Like, I'm taking roll. I don't know that person. And the foreman replied, she is the Moabitess who came back from Moab with Naomi. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters. She went into the field and has worked steadily from morning till now, except for a short rest in a shelter. So Boaz said to Ruth, my daughter, listen to me. Go and glean in another field. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with my servant girls. Watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow along after the girls. I have told the men not to touch you, and whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled. At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground. She exclaimed, why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner? And catch this, Boaz replies, I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and your mother and your homeland and came to live with the people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. What we see is this. Ruth is incredibly faithful to Naomi. So much so at the beginning of the chapter, they have like a little team meeting, and they're like, okay, how are we going to eat? How are we going to be taken care of? And Ruth says, okay, I'm going to go into the fields. I'm going to do the lowest of the low work. I'm going to humble myself to practically nothing and just pick up the leftovers as people are walking through the crop, and I'm going to gather them. And I'm going to take care of you, Naomi, my not blood mother, like the mother who did not give birth to me, my mother-in-law. I am going to take care of you. I'm going to love you because I realize, Naomi, that you're much older. That work is not really capable of you doing it. And so I'm going to sacrifice of myself to love you. As if it hasn't already been enough that I left my family and my religion and my homeland behind for your God and your people. I will now go do the hard work that most people will not notice in order to serve you and love you. And catch this, Boaz notices. He sees and he goes, who is that would come behind everybody else that's harvesting and pick up the scraps and not take a break all day? And the foreman tells him it's the woman who's taking care of Naomi because they already know. They have already heard of the faithfulness of Ruth. Her faithfulness to Naomi is already being spoken about. There doesn't need to be a narrative of like, oh, well, she came from here and she's been doing this. But he says, oh, that's the woman that we've been hearing about. And Boaz sees her and he says, hey, I'm going to take care of you. And I'm going to look after you because no one else is. And because you are doing great things for Naomi, because you are loving and taking care of her. And what I want you to see is this. God is taking care of faithful children. God takes care of faithful children. What we see in the book of Ruth and what we look throughout is we never see Ruth say like, okay, I'm going to go here because God is calling me here. Or I'm going to do this because God is calling me to do this. We never see like a narrative or a conversation between God and man like we do in many other Old Testament books. We don't see any of that. Rather, we just kind of see like a bird's eye view of the life of Ruth and Naomi. And what we see is that God is at work even if Ruth and Naomi don't see it. The way that the story is told is that God is acting on behalf of his people and doing things for his faithful people, even if Ruth and Naomi don't see it at the time. And that God is acting on behalf of his people who are sacrificing of themselves to love one another. That is a great God. When we sing songs like George finished with, where we say, man, I submit my heart to you that you would speak truth into my life. God, you are love. You are all these things. When we truly believe those, we're able to step into the shoes of Ruth and love and sacrifice of ourselves for the sake of other people without any concern about who is taking care of us. 0%. Complete selfless love and service. And the truth is, man, very few of us, I would submit none of us, including myself, do that well. Like we just don't. Very few of us have the faithfulness of Ruth because we don't really trust that God is taking care of faithful people. And because here's why. We see a lot of bad junk in the world. I'm like, okay, well, where is God taking care of me when my parents are getting divorced? That doesn't sound like God is taking care of me. Where is God taking care of me when all my friends have abandoned me at school? Where is God taking care of me when my boyfriend has broken up with me? Where is God taking care of me when I feel like everything is going wrong? I'm failing all my classes. Nothing is going the way that it's going. I didn't get into the colleges that I wanted to get into. Where is your great God during all those moments? And I would submit to you that Ruth probably had the same questions when she was on her hands and knees picking up scraps for her family. Because very few of us are in those moments going, praise Jesus. Because it doesn't make sense. We do not correlate a good God to hands and feet work. But the truth is, because Ruth is faithful in the little things, because she has honor and she has integrity and she loves her family, God is going to take care of her. And I want to submit to you this. The real struggle that we have in trusting that God is going to take care of us is because check how God takes care of Ruth. Okay, and I want you to catch this. God sends another faithful person to take care of Ruth. Okay, and it's not because Ruth is so weak and Ruth needs a man to just take care of her and love her and then everything will be okay and it'll be like a Nicholas Sparks movie and it's going to be so great. No, it's because in that time period, Ruth was going to need a husband, or else it was going to be hands and knees harvesting for the rest of her life. And eventually in chapters 3 and 4, Ruth is going to go on to marry Boaz, and God is going to do incredible things through their lineage. But God uses Boaz, another faithful person, to take care of his faithful people. And the reason we struggle with God being faithful to us and taking care of his people is because most of us don't surround ourselves with faithful people. And that doesn't let you off the hook because a lot of you are surrounding other people, and we're not picking up the slack. Like we are supposed to be someone else's faithful person that takes care of them, and we're not stepping into that. And so what I'd submit to you is you don't really know how faithful God can be or how he can take care of you because you've never seen it played out in action. You've never seen your parents take care of you and fight for you and sacrifice you. You've never seen your friends take care of you and fight for you and sacrifice for you when someone else is making fun of you or picking on you or whatever it is. You've never seen that. And many of us have never enacted on behalf of those people. We have never been someone else's faithful person. And so there are other people who have no idea how faithful God can be because the church is not being great representatives. And I'd submit to you that is the real struggle. And so what does the church need to do to sacrifice ourselves, to love other people, to take care of other people? How do we get to that point? We must simply be able to trust God, and we also must be able to know this. God has already taken care of your most immediate and urgent need. Your most immediate and urgent need is that you are a sinner. And that's not me trying to be like, you sinner, tap you on the forehead, be like, go back home. That's me trying to say that you are not God. Therefore, you are not holy. Therefore, you have sin. And so God takes care of that most immediate and urgent need through Jesus on the cross, through God in the flesh, because he is crucified and he raises again, so that way sinful people would have relationship with him. That is the faithfulness of God, that he has already taken care of your most immediate and urgent need, and we must start there. So for those of us that are not followers of Jesus, that have not given our lives to Jesus, then we don't know that faithfulness. We can never know that faithfulness that God brings. But for those of us, many of us in this room that are already following Jesus, we need to be reminded regularly that God has already proven faithful 2,000 years ago. He need do nothing else to prove his faithfulness. We need do nothing else to put God to the test. He has already passed said test fairly well, because he has taken care of us through Jesus. It says on the screen, in Christ, our need is met. It's already done. It's already taken care of. We have no other need that is as urgent as that one. And here's the deal. Here's the cool thing about Jesus. Ruth marries Boaz, and you know what happens down their family line? Jesus. God is so faithful all the years before to Ruth, the hand and knees crawler through the crops, that he will bring his son, God in the flesh, all these years later to be faithful to you. You are literally reading about the faithfulness of God in your life if you are a follower of Jesus by reading Ruth, which is very few books into the Old Testament. Like the timeline of Ruth is before Kings. That's nuts. Like if that, there is I'm not a history buff. That is a pretty cool historical fact. That Jesus comes from the line of Ruth, that because of her faithfulness, we can find full life in Christ. We owe Ruth a great debt. That is incredible, incredible truth. And so what I want to simply ask is this: does our life speak to deep trust? Does the life of the Christian, does the life of a believer speak to great trust? Do people look at you and they go, man, how can you love me so well? How can you take care of me so well? It feels like you're not even taking care of yourself. It feels like you're not doing all these things. And you say, well, my God is taking care of me. I'm not concerned about those things. That when people look at your life and it looks like everything is burning down around you, yet you are able to step into life and love people and bring life to them, and they go, how? When everything around you looks so bad, are you able to be concerned about me? You go, because God is taking care of those things. Who am I to be concerned? He has already proven faithful through history. He will prove faithful again. And for many of us, we need to look at our lives and step back like we do the book of Ruth. And sometimes we don't see the faithfulness of God because we've never looked back on his faithfulness. We've never looked at moments in our lives that seem so awful, and we say, man, God brought us out of that. God took care of us. Why would he not bring us out of the junk we're in now? God has proven faithful to me all these years. One of my favorite things is talking to teenagers, and especially teenagers that grew up in the church. Because here's the deal. In a churchy word, right, those of us that are followers of Jesus that have put our faith in Christ, we have this thing called a testimony, a story about our faith lives. Okay, and some of us have sat through and we've heard testimonies that are like, yeah, I was 4 years old and I was selling cocaine on the street corner, and at 5, the Lord saved me from deep sin and drug addiction. And so I talk with teenagers that are like, I don't think I have a testimony because I've never done cocaine. And so I talk, and they go, my testimony is so boring. And I go, okay, tell it to me. Well, I was like 6. And like my mom told me about Jesus, and I was like, that sounds pretty cool. I'll follow that guy. And then here I am at 16 in the church. And I go, okay, like tell me about your family. Like, well, like, you know, like both my parents are still together. Like I get along with my siblings okay. I have a pretty good amount of friends. Like everything seems okay. Like my life is just boring. No, it sounds like God has proven faithful. You should have the best testimony of the rest of us, because you didn't have to get punched in the face to follow Jesus. Some of us have to fall into deep pits and holes of sin before we follow Jesus, before we recognize Jesus. And some of you, like, he's just proving faithful along the way, and you're just calling it boring. God is not boring. He has proven faithful. Your testimony should walk through and be like, my God has taken such good care of me. I have proven faithful to him. He has proven faithful to me, and he is doing great things in my life. How good is my God? And that doesn't mean he's not faithful in other people's lives that go through great sin. God works in whatever way he needs work. If he needs Ruth on hands and knees collecting from the harvest, then he needs Ruth on hands and knees. But if he needs you living a boring life in order to preach the gospel and in order to speak to his name, he's proven faithful. There is no greater narrative of God. And truly, do we want the other testimony? Listen, mine's not a fun roller coaster of happy days and smiles. It's pretty awful along the way. I submit to you, I wish that my life oftentimes was boring. As George comes up to lead us in worship, I want you to think about this. Do you trust God enough to sacrifice all of yourself, to have honor and integrity, to work on behalf of the person next to you, to love them, to take care of them, because they are your friend? Or maybe they're your enemy. That you would still love them and take care of them, that you would show them who God is, that you would prove faithful. Do you ever look back on your life and see the faithfulness of God? Some of you are maybe journalers, you're diary people. All the dudes in the room are like, no. But maybe secretly. Maybe we stop journaling and writing in our diaries about the seventh boy that we talked to that month or the seventh girl that we talked to that month. We start writing about God. That we would look back and we would flip to August 7th of 2013 and we would go, oh my gosh, that was going on then? God proved pretty faithful in the last 4 years. That we would regularly make it a spiritual practice to look back on our lives and say, where's the faithfulness of God? That we would look at our lives the way that we look at the book of Ruth from a bird's eye view, and we would say, man, it doesn't seem like Ruth sees it, but God is clearly present here. He's clearly at work, and he's going to be at work through her family for the rest of time. If nothing else, if God is who he says he is, if he is faithful the way that he says he is faithful, maybe the first step of trust is that we just worship God like he is faithful. Maybe we stop thinking that we're too cool for a God that made our lives boring or a God that has proven faithful. And we just worship because he is that good God. Or maybe you don't know anything about God, you don't know anything about Jesus, but you're like, man, how can I follow the guy that has my back at all points in time, even when I can't see it, even when it looks tragic? How do I follow that Jesus? Talk to some of our adults, to Kelsey, to my wife, to Deanna, whoever it is. Talk to them and say, man, tell me about this Jesus. Because I've never heard it that way. Every time I've ever heard it, it sounds like it's about all these other things. I've never heard it about faithfulness to people. I've never heard it that way. And I never knew that I had to be faithful to him and to others. Ask them about that. They would love to talk to you about that. I'm going to pray, and they're going to lead us in worship.